Who let the janitor into the front valet entrance? Cheryl Drayton's voice sliced through the air like polished glass. One manicured hand fluttered toward the marble floor, as if Maria Lane's mop bucket had personally offended her. This is a billion-dollar product launch, not a utility hallway. Maria said nothing. She adjusted the strap of her cart and nudged it quietly out of the traffic lane. Her worn shoes squeaked faintly as she moved across the pristine lobby tiles, each one polished more by her than by any machine. I said, "Maintenance access is through the back. Do you speak English, or do I need to send an email to your supervisor?" Maria didn't flinch. She just looked up, steady. "You should save the email, Miss Drayton. You'll want it for the apology draft later." Ethan Rowe's logo glowed 10 feet tall behind them, suspended in LED brilliance from the glass atrium above. But the real spotlight had already shifted, not toward the billionaire's sleek press wall, not toward Cheryl's designer heels, but toward a mop cart and a woman who refused to break eye contact. If you've ever been underestimated in the very room you built, subscribe now. This one's for you. She didn't walk like a janitor, not with her shoulders squared and her gaze unshaken, not with the quiet, practiced stillness that came from years of being the authority in rooms where children broke down and systems failed them. Maria Lane had once commanded university classrooms, research labs, and think tanks filled with government officials trying to solve America's education crisis. Now she clocked in every evening at 5 p.m. and mopped floors for people who thought doctor meant dentist. There were two kinds of power in this building, the kind that arrived in Rolls Royces and the kind that hadn't said its name yet. Miles was waiting for her upstairs, 12 years old, bright mind, fused spine. He'd asked her once what she used to do before cleaning buildings. "Same thing I do now," she'd said. "Fix broken systems." He didn't understand then. Maybe he still didn't. But Maria knew something Cheryl Drayton never would. If you build a thing with real love, even if you sweep floors to keep it alive, eventually it comes back to you. Where are you watching from? Because this isn't the story of a janitor being told to leave. This is the story of a CEO publicly shaming the only person who could save her career, and not realizing it until the cameras were already rolling. Maria didn't look back as she guided her cart into the service corridor, her fingers brushing the keycard clipped to her belt loop. She'd been given the wrong access level again, just like last week. She'd fix it later, maybe. Or maybe she wouldn't. It wasn't like anyone was racing to let her in. Down the dim hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed low like annoyed wasps. The tile changed from polished white to utility gray, and the air turned cold and dry, no longer perfumed for guests. She paused by the staff lounge door. Inside, Miles sat curled on the vinyl couch, his backpack open and a chess puzzle book in his lap. His legs, wrapped in braces, didn't move much, but his eyes were quick. They always had been. "You good, kiddo?" she asked softly, leaning into the frame. He looked up with a small smile. "Board's almost solved. Pawn trap on page 32 is tricky." Maria opened her satchel and pulled out the sandwich she'd made from the last 2 slices of bread. Ham. Thin. Not enough lettuce to matter. She handed it to him without hesitation. "I thought that was your lunch," he said, frowning. "I'm not that hungry," she lied, brushing crumbs off his shirt. He hesitated, then took a bite, chewing slowly like he was trying to save it. She tucked a blanket over his lap and checked the time. 15 minutes before guests started arriving in bulk. Ethan Rowe would be down soon. She'd seen the posters. The same kid she used to pass in the hallway at Jefferson Elementary. The one who never packed a lunch. Always quiet. always sketching wires and brain circuits in his spiral notebook while others played. She remembered the day she'd found him sitting alone behind the cafeteria dumpster. He hadn't said thank you when she handed him the tray she paid for, with the last crumpled dollar in her coat pocket. But he hadn't looked away either. The tech world was buzzing about him now. The billionaire dropout with a bleeding heart for education reform. The software launch was being treated like the second coming of Einstein, complete with drone cameras and TED Talk lighting. Maria had her doubts. She returned to the lobby just as the first wave of executives strolled in, badges swinging from silk lanyards. The women wore neutral tones, sleek ponytails, and expressions of earned importance. The men leaned into business casual and performed confidence like it was sport. One of them glanced at her cart and lifted his shoe with disdain. She cleaned in silence. Always had. It let her listen. Did you hear? He's keeping the algorithm open source. Madness. HR's worried it'll be a PR disaster if the launch glitches live. Wait till Cheryl finds out the school pilot failed in 2 of the test districts. Maria kept sweeping. Every fragment of information slipped into her mind like puzzle pieces returning to their original shape. 10 years ago, she'd written a white paper about this exact software model. Adaptive testing, emotional feedback integration, learning curve memory reinforcement. She never published it. A budget cut and a family emergency had shut her research down before it could see daylight. Her credentials were still in the system, somewhere, probably archived under her maiden name. Cheryl passed by again, heels clacking. She didn't acknowledge Maria, but Maria wasn't watching her anymore. She was watching the boy in the tailored suit who had once sat behind a cafeteria, notebook on his knees and hunger in his eyes. Ethan Rowe stepped through the glass doors, flanked by assistants, his presence magnetic, even without effort. He didn't notice Maria at first. His gaze swept the space, then fixed forward, expression unreadable. He looked taller now, broader, but his eyes hadn't changed. Still observant, still tired around the edges, still too serious for someone that young. Maria stepped aside as his entourage passed. She turned her cart toward the side elevator. And then he paused. It was barely a second. A flicker of recognition in his peripheral vision. His head turned just slightly, as if some faint alarm had gone off. But one of the assistants leaned in to speak, and the moment passed. Maria entered the service lift, alone. The doors closed with a hush. In the mirror lining the elevator wall, she saw herself the way they saw her. Gray uniform, hair tied back, name badge smudged, invisible. She adjusted the strap on her wrist brace and breathed through the dull ache in her hand. It had flared again this morning. Old injury from another life. There was a time when her hands held dry erase markers instead of mop handles, when her voice echoed in lecture halls, not silent hallways. That time was over, but not forgotten, not by everyone, not yet. She pressed the button for sublevel 2 and descended without a sound. Down there, behind locked doors, the servers hummed with code she once dreamed into theory, and someone, somewhere in that crowd upstairs, was going to realize she was never just the janitor. Just not yet. Sublevel 2 always smelled like heat and plastic. The servers throbbed behind glass walls, blinking in steady rhythms like mechanical heartbeats. Maria moved through the corridor unnoticed. Past the tech crew calibrating the stage uplink. Past the interns with earpieces scurrying between cables and crates. She'd taken this route dozens of times. Long before the media trucks parked outside. Long before Cheryl had ever heard of Ethan Rowe. It was the only shortcut to the East Freight elevator. And she used it because no one asked questions in server rooms. A young tech guy in a branded hoodie nearly bumped into her, juggling a crate of wireless mics. "Sorry," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Maria nodded and stepped aside. Her mop glided across the floor without a sound. She kept her head down, but her mind worked faster than her hands. She could see the flaw already. The data relay cables weren't running parallel. Someone had looped a redundant strand through the wrong uplink, creating a latency echo. It wasn't enough to crash the system. Not yet. But under strain, with live feedback in the adaptive modules, it would buckle. The error wasn't in the software. It was in the environment. She didn't speak up. She'd learned a long time ago. When a woman like her corrected a man with credentials, she wasn't helping. She was overstepping, interrupting, undermining. Best case scenario, ignored. Worst case, removed. Maria exited through the freight door and took the lift to the executive floor. The carpet changed there. So did the air. It always smelled faintly like lemon oil and leather, like power pretending to be subtle. Her next stop was the auxiliary lounge to clean up before the VIP guests arrived. She moved quietly through the space, adjusting a coffee cart, replacing napkins, straightening coasters. One of the large screens nearby flickered on, a promo reel for the software launch. Soft piano, children smiling. Buzzwords like revolution, access, and innovation floated in elegant white text. She almost laughed. The footage showed classrooms full of clean desks and happy teachers. Not the roaches under her son's special ed trailer. Not the broken lift he waited beside twice a week. Not the 2-month delay in assistive tech approvals. Innovation didn't mean much when the people funding it didn't understand who they were claiming to help. She checked the time. Miles would need his medication soon. He was reading quietly in the staff lounge, but he didn't like the noise upstairs. She'd taught him how to block it out with puzzles, but she still worried. Maria turned toward the hallway and froze. Cheryl stood there, arms folded, mouth drawn tight. "I told you to stay off this floor." Maria kept her expression even. "I have a cleaning order for the auxiliary lounge. You have access to the hallway, not this sweet." Maria didn't respond. She stepped back toward her cart. "You think because the boy you helped 10 years ago is famous now, you have a stake in this?" Cheryl's voice lowered. "Let me explain something to you in terms you'll understand. People like you don't belong in this space. Your background, that's it." Maria didn't blink. "Then I suggest you keep an eye on the foreground." It's about to collapse. Cheryl narrowed her eyes. "What did you say?" Maria tilted her head. "I said your stage uplink has a redundant loop in the wrong junction. It'll overload during live adaptive testing, especially with latency stacked from 4 active devices. For a beat." Cheryl just stared. Then she scoffed. "Is that supposed to impress me?" "It's supposed to warn you," Maria said, already turning away. Behind her, she could feel the confusion simmering under Cheryl's glare. She wouldn't report it. Not yet. That would mean acknowledging the janitor had found a flaw in her event setup. Maria exited without another word. Back in the break room, Miles was working on a logic grid puzzle, his face flushed with concentration. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the pill case, and handed him the midday dose with a juice box from her bag. "Everything okay upstairs?" he asked between sips. "Depends," she said, brushing his hair from his forehead. "If we're lucky, I'm still invisible," he frowned. "That's lucky." Maria smiled softly. "For now." They sat in silence a few minutes longer. Then an intern from facilities popped his head in. Ms. Lane?" he said, eyes wide. "Someone from tech needs you downstairs." Maria stood slowly, careful with her wrist brace. Did they say why? No. Just that something's wrong and they heard. You might know what it is. She didn't answer right away, just pulled her mop cart behind her like she had a dozen times before. But this time, someone was watching her leave. Miles sat up a little straighter, eyes following his mother as the door closed. The tech crew was already gathered when Maria stepped off the elevator. Someone had wheeled the diagnostic terminal into the center of the server hall, its display flashing amber. A tangle of cables spilled across the floor like veins exposed in panic surgery. The air pulsed with rising tension. Too many voices talking over each other. She didn't announce herself. She simply walked to the edge of the chaos and waited. A man in a headset noticed her. He was younger than she expected. Early 20s, maybe. Sleeves rolled, eyes darting between graphs on his tablet. "You the janitor?" he asked, breath short. Maria nodded once. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Did you say something earlier about the relay junction?" "I did." He looked her over, cautious. "And you know how to fix it?" Maria glanced at the server map on the screen. One tap on the tablet, and she was right back where she'd been 10 years ago. Modular patterns, color-coded signal latency, neural input, crossfade prediction. "I designed the baseline protocol this system is built on," she said quietly. "Before you were probably out of middle school?" The young man blinked. He looked toward another tech, older, skeptical, who stepped forward with folded arms. "Who exactly are you?" Maria didn't flinch. "A janitor. Who just saved you from a stage crash broadcast to 4 news networks?" She walked past them to the main interface, her movement sure and efficient. With a few swipes and one cable realignment, the lag on the system display dropped. Green light. Silence rippled through the room. The younger tech stared at the screen, then back at her. That fixed it." The older man's mouth moved, but no words came. Maria turned back toward the elevator. "Tell your team to double-check every input path through the mobile interface suite. The redundancy algorithm folds if more than 6 student profiles request real-time feedback simultaneously. Your beta stress test capped at 4. Then she was gone. No applause, no thank you. Just blinking cursors and a tech crew staring after a woman with a mop bucket and a doctoral-level memory for signal path design. Upstairs, Cheryl stood near the main doors of the auditorium, reviewing last-minute logistics. The press was already in position. Light rigs casting hot reflections on glass and metal. Ethan Rowe would be speaking in 20 minutes. A junior coordinator rushed toward her, whispering urgently in her ear. "What do you mean the janitor fixed it?" Cheryl hissed. "She knew the fault sequence," the assistant replied, "down to the threading rate. And she didn't touch a keyboard wrong. The diagnostics are clean now. Look." He handed her a tablet. Cheryl stared at the system logs. The terminal had logged 3 commands executed under temporary admin override. All correct. No redundancy left. Latency optimized. And beside the entry logs, username, guest access, authorization, facility support. She barely registered the clatter of the cart behind her until it stopped nearby. Maria didn't look at her, just emptied a trash bin with calm, deliberate motion. "What did you do downstairs?" Cheryl asked under her breath. Maria placed the bin back in place. "My job." "That wasn't your job. That was our proprietary system." Maria finally looked up. "Then you should have designed it better." Their eyes locked. Cheryl's jaw flexed, but her reply caught in her throat. Before she could recover, Ethan appeared from the corridor. He wore no tie, just a dark charcoal jacket over a fitted shirt, confident, understated. His eyes swept the space and landed on Maria. This time, he stopped. Longer than a glance, not a flicker, a pause. Recognition. He stepped forward. "Sorry," he said, addressing Maria, "but Do I know you? Cheryl interjected, too quickly. She's just facilities. Maria didn't move. Her eyes met Ethan's. You might remember a sandwich, she said. One you didn't ask for. One someone paid for when the lunch line wouldn't. Ethan blinked. Slowly, the color drained from his face. His lips parted. No sound. He stepped back. You... That was you, Maria nodded once. Still is. Before Cheryl could speak again, Ethan turned and walked away, calling for his assistant. Cheryl turned to Maria, eyes sharp. What are you playing at? I'm not playing, Maria said. I'm remembering. Some of us have to, because we were never allowed to forget. She pushed her card away, each step echoing louder than the last. Miles was waiting in the back hallway when she returned. He'd seen it on the lobby monitor. Ethan's face, the recognition, the camera catching it all. Was that the kid? He asked. Not a kid anymore, Maria said, resting a hand on his shoulder. But it was him? Maria smiled. Yeah. It was. Miles looked up at her. Does he know what you really did? Not yet. She squeezed his hand gently. But he's starting to remember. The ballroom lights dimmed as a soft chime signaled the event's official start. Maria stood in the shadows just outside the main entrance. Her cart parked neatly beside the wall. Her uniform blended into the backdrop, the mop handle propped like a staff at her side. Inside, Ethan Rose stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted. He didn't speak right away. His hands were clasped lightly, head bowed just slightly, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then he raised his gaze to the sea of executives, educators, press, and investors. This began, he said, voice clear and steady, with $1 I didn't earn. There was a pause. No one understood. I was in 5th grade. Free lunch didn't cover what I needed, and I didn't have the words to ask for help. But someone noticed. She gave me a tray and walked away before I could say anything. I never forgot it. That tray meant more than food. It meant someone saw me. Maria didn't move. Her fingers curled lightly around the edge of the mop cart. A quiet stir passed through the room. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity. Ethan continued. Everything I've built since then, this company, this platform, this initiative, it all traces back to that moment. To that act of quiet dignity, he gestured to the large display behind him. The interface lit up. Smooth transitions, student feedback models, neural learning paths. The crowd leaned in, but Maria watched him. Watched the way his fingers twitched slightly when he tapped the clicker. Watched how his shoulders squared when the screens glitched and recovered. Watched how he never glanced at Cheryl, who stood just off stage, frozen in tight-lipped silence. He was performing, yes, but he wasn't pretending. Ethan was no longer the boy behind the dumpster. He was something more dangerous now. He was grateful. And today, he said, we launched something that has the potential to rewrite access. Not just for students like I was, but for anyone who's ever felt invisible in a system designed to ignore them. Applause broke, tentative at first, then stronger. Cheryl stepped forward to introduce the demo sequence, but Ethan raised a hand, cutting her off gently. There's someone I want to thank, he said. Someone in this room. Cheryl's smile flickered. Maria turned slightly toward the wall. She could feel the shift in air pressure when every head turned to scan the crowd. She doesn't know I'm doing this, Ethan said, and she probably doesn't want credit. But without her, this entire system would have collapsed. Not years ago. Today, 10 minutes before this event began, she identified a fault our engineers missed. She fixed it, quietly. Just like she always has, Cheryl stiffened beside the AV crew. Her jaw clenched. She looked like she wanted to speak. But Ethan wasn't finished. She was my janitor once, he said. but she was also my mentor. And before that, she was one of the most promising minds in cognitive education theory this country has ever seen. A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Maria stayed still. Ethan turned, looking into the shadows beyond the light. "Maria Lane, will you join me?" The words landed like thunder. Maria didn't move at first. The silence stretched. Her heart beat in her throat. She could feel every eye turning toward the edge of the room, searching for a uniform that didn't belong in the center of this stage. Then, Miles. He was sitting on a folding chair backstage, legs swinging slightly over the edge. He didn't say anything, just gave her a look, a quiet nod. So Maria stepped forward. She left the cart behind. Every step echoed in the marble silence. Her shoes were scuffed. Her name badge was crooked, but her spine was straight. When she reached the stage, Ethan stepped aside and held out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The applause was hesitant at first. Then it built, layered, genuine, uncoached. Not polite, not performative. Real. Cheryl's face had gone pale. Maria didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was louder than anything she could have said. The woman who'd been dismissed an hour ago now stood beside the founder himself. The system she once sketched on napkins running behind her in real time. Ethan leaned in, quietly. "I still remember the drawing you made. The one with the river and the nodes." Maria smiled faintly. "The learning map." He nodded. "It's still in the core design." "Your version." The lights faded as the presentation resumed. Maria stayed beside him for a moment longer, then returned to the wings. Backstage, Miles was waiting. His eyes were wide. "You were on stage," he whispered. Maria knelt beside him. "Only for a minute." He shook his head. "But they saw you." She looked at the boy she'd sacrificed everything for. "They saw what matters." The launch reception began less than an hour after the applause ended. The ballroom transformed quickly. Rows of chairs swept away, replaced by cocktail tables and branded hors d'oeuvres. Crystal flutes clinked. Laughter filled the air. Conversations buzzed in curated pockets of strategic networking. Maria didn't attend. She was back in the staff corridor, quietly washing her hands in the janitor's sink. The stage lights had made her palms sweat, and though no one had handed her a mic, the weight of that moment still trembled through her joints. She could still feel the warmth of Ethan's grip, still see the crowd's eyes on her, some with curiosity, some with confusion, and a few, she could tell, with shame. She dried her hands slowly, rolling her wrist to ease the tension in the brace. In the mirror, her reflection looked the same. Same gray uniform, same soft lines around the eyes. But something had shifted, something behind her own gaze. She didn't need their applause. She didn't want their spotlight. But she wasn't going to stay invisible anymore either. From behind her, a quiet knock at the door. She turned. It was the young tech from the server room, the one with the rolled sleeves and the headset. He held a broad tablet against his chest, eyes wide, almost shy. "Ms. Lane," he said. She nodded. "They're asking for the full system breakdown logs," he said, almost apologetic. "But we were hoping you could take a look before we send it to press." Maria tilted her head. "You want me to vet your report?" He flushed slightly. "You saw something no one else did. We just thought." She walked past him gently, motioning for the tablet. He handed it over like it was something sacred. She read for a moment in silence, scrolling, adjusting the brightness. Halfway down, she paused and tapped the screen. "This variable loop," she said. "You're labeling it as a standard error recovery. It's not. It's a feedback absorption buffer. You're measuring delay instead of behavioral deviation. He blinked. Oh? Maria returned the tablet. You'll want to fix that. Otherwise, the analytics will misreport intervention success rates by almost 10%. He looked at her like she'd just reprogrammed gravity. You built this, didn't you? No, she said simply. I built the theory. They built the machine. She walked back to her cart. He didn't stop her, just stood there, tablet forgotten in his hand. By the time Maria returned to the elevator, the event was thinning. The press had left. Most of the investors had migrated to the rooftop terrace, where the champagne flowed easier. Cheryl was nowhere in sight. But Ethan stood by the entrance to the East Lounge, one hand resting on a table, as he spoke with an older man in a charcoal suit. His voice was low, but his face was animated. Focused? Maria didn't interrupt. She waited beside her cart, keeping one eye on the time. Miles would be getting tired soon. He never liked loud spaces after long days. She'd promised him pizza on the way home. Ethan turned then, catching sight of her. He murmured something to the man beside him and crossed the room. "You're not staying?" he asked softly. "I've got a son to get home to," she said, adjusting her bag. "I remember you had a kid," Ethan said. "He's here?" She nodded. "He's the one who noticed your interface menu had accessibility issues. Said your alt text labels were lazy." Ethan grinned. "Smart." "Very," she said. "Gets it from his father." There was a pause. "You disappeared," Ethan said gently. "I tried to find you. Years ago. After the acquisition. No one at the district office knew where you went. I left," she replied. "Had to. My husband passed. Miles needed surgeries. Insurance dropped us the same month. I didn't have time for theories." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Just once," Maria continued, voice calm. "It wasn't your job to find me. You were building something, and you built it well, because of you. Maybe. But that doesn't make me less proud of you." His expression shifted. No one had said that to him in a long time. Maria could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, like a weight had finally been named. "I'm setting up a foundation," he said. "A real one, not performative, for adaptive access and implementation. I want you on the board. I clean floors, Ethan." "You diagnosed a cross-loop failure without touching a keyboard." "I also missed my son's therapy intake to be here today." "Then we'll build something that makes sure mothers like you don't have to choose anymore." Maria looked at him for a long time. And then, quietly, she nodded. Not yes, not no. Just enough. Enough to say she was listening. She turned to go. Ethan didn't follow. Back in the lounge, Miles looked up from his puzzle book. He was almost asleep, head resting against his arm. "You ready?" Maria asked. He yawned. She lifted his backpack onto her shoulder and knelt to adjust his leg braces. As they moved toward the exit, two executives from earlier stepped aside to let them pass. Neither said anything, but one of them nodded. Not just at the boy, at her, like they saw her now. Really saw her. And they stepped back with just a little more respect. The next morning, the office smelled like lemon wax and tension. Maria arrived at her usual time, 40 minutes before the first executive's coffee order landed on the concierge desk. She wore the same uniform, same wrist brace, same beat-up sneakers. The building didn't look any different either. Same cold tile, same polished railings, same oversized screens cycling through last night's photos like a victory lap on loop. She passed one display that froze mid-transition. Ethan on stage, hand extended. Her, stepping into the spotlight. Then it blinked and moved on. She kept walking. Her badge still beeped at every restricted door. No upgrades there, but people moved differently around her now. The receptionist offered a startled, "Good morning," instead of the usual silence. The junior manager on the second floor nearly dropped his coffee when he saw her and rushed to hold the elevator. Maria declined. She took the stairs. Upstairs, Cheryl was already pacing outside the boardroom, tablet in hand, jaw set like stone. Maria slowed as she approached. Not to speak, just to observe. Cheryl's heels clicked in uneven rhythm. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual, and her eyes were shadowed with something that wasn't just fatigue. The door to the boardroom opened. Ethan stood in the frame. "Maria," he said with a nod, as if he'd been expecting her. "Do you have a minute?" Cheryl's gaze snapped to him. She's exactly who I need," Ethan said. Without raising his voice, Maria stepped in without hesitation. The room was minimalist. Glass table, dark wood trim, a city skyline behind tinted windows. 6 people sat around the table already. 2 from Ethan's team, 1 from finance, a woman from operations, and 2 investors she recognized from the launch event. No one blinked when Maria took the seat at the far end. Ethan remained standing. Let's cut to it. The launch was a success, but it revealed a bigger problem. We've built a strong engine, but it's not calibrated for the students who need it most. The woman from operations leaned forward. "Are you referring to the pilot failure in Oak County?" "And Trenton." "In East Row," Ethan confirmed. 3 districts, 3 incompatible integrations. That's not a tech problem. That's a design philosophy issue. All eyes turned to Maria. She didn't look up. Not yet. "It's a perspective problem," she said quietly. "You can't design a tool for invisible people unless you've lived through what it means to be unseen." A long pause followed. The man from finance cleared his throat. "And you? Have that perspective?" Now she looked up. "I worked in those districts before I had to mop the floors of buildings that ignored the systems they claimed to reform. I raised a son who was written off by algorithms that labeled him too difficult to measure. And I wrote the early framework this program still runs on. You tell me silence again, but not a dismissive one, a thoughtful one." Ethan nodded. "I've offered Maria a seat on the advisory board. Not symbolic, full authority, especially in community adaptation and accessibility oversight." Someone shifted in their seat. Cheryl entered the room quietly and stood behind the glass wall. She didn't speak, but she listened. The investor to Maria's left finally spoke. "What would you do differently?" Maria folded her hands calmly. "You want your software to work in underfunded schools? Start by designing for teachers who have no aides and for students who can't afford broadband at home. Stop measuring success by immediate retention metrics and start tracking emotional engagement patterns. Make the AI curious, not just responsive." Ethan smiled. She continued. "And stop asking for applause when you integrate diversity. Start asking why the people who know the most about the broken system are the ones you never hired." The operations lead leaned back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Then slowly, she nodded. By the time the meeting adjourned, Maria hadn't raised her voice once. But when she stood to leave, the entire room rose with her. Outside, Cheryl still hovered in the hall. Her eyes didn't meet Maria's, but her voice was quieter than usual. "I didn't know." "That I had a doctorate?" Maria asked. "That you'd built half the theory Ethan's now monetizing?" Maria tilted her head. "No. You didn't know you needed to ask." Cheryl said nothing. Maria walked past her, the morning sunlight catching in her hair. Downstairs, she stopped at the janitor's closet, pulled out her cart, and rolled it toward the far wing of the building. She still had shifts to finish. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had noticed. And the next time she passed a group of interns whispering in the hallway, one of them looked up, not with confusion or disdain, but with recognition. Maria's cart rolled to a gentle stop at the end of the east corridor. She glanced at the maintenance schedule clipped to the handle, but her mind wasn't on the floors today. Not entirely. Her son's IEP meeting was tomorrow, and she'd already printed the documents Ethan's assistant emailed her. Reformatted lesson flowcharts, updated accessibility interface snapshots, pilot metrics. She was no longer just attending that meeting as a parent. She was bringing solutions no one else in that room would be prepared to challenge. The past week had shifted more than Maria let on. Her hours hadn't changed. Her pay hadn't either. But small signs kept accumulating. Ethan's assistant now addressed her with direct eye contact. The cafeteria manager comped Miles's breakfast without blinking. And when she arrived at the third-floor lounge yesterday, the entire floor had gone awkwardly silent. The whisper network was alive, and for once, it was whispering her name. Still, the days weren't easier. Dignity didn't eliminate fatigue. After the meeting yesterday, she'd found herself back in the stairwell with a bottle of industrial cleaner and a bucket full of sour mop water. Recognition didn't replace the labor. Not yet. Not until the foundation was built. And she was beginning to realize that Ethan's vision, however genuine, still needed scaffolding she would have to design. She tucked the cleaning schedule into her back pocket and walked down the hall. Around the corner, she found Miles sitting on the bench outside the main data lab, his tablet balanced on his lap. "You're early," she said. He looked up. "They told me to wait here." "Something about running a new layout test for the alt text integration?" She raised an eyebrow. "Did you volunteer for that?" "They bribed me with extra interface tokens." Maria chuckled. "Smart. Like you said, get paid in access when they don't want to write checks." He grinned, then glanced down at his lap again. "Mom, you're gonna do it, right? The board thing? I haven't signed anything yet." "But you will." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked through the narrow window into the lab. Techs circled digital whiteboards. One wall displayed lines of feedback data, pulsing with subtle shifts. Each one a student interaction. Engagement scores, reaction times, anxiety markers. The same data she once fought to humanize. "They listen to you now," Miles said, softer. Maria nodded. "Some of them. Ethan does. He remembers what it's like to be overlooked." Miles hesitated. "Does that mean people like us have to wait for someone to remember us to matter?" She looked down at him. "No," she said. "It means when someone does remember, you don't let them forget again." He leaned against her side, his weight warm through the fabric of her shirt. Inside the lab, the lead engineer waved them in. Maria stepped through the door, and the energy shifted. Not because she demanded it, but because her presence was no longer background noise. "Glad you're here," the engineer said. "We're stress testing the updated adaptive loop, and your accessibility notes were thorough." "I take that as a compliment." "It is." They pulled up the latest version of the interface. Maria's revisions had been implemented in less than 48 hours. Student avatars resized for vision assistance. Color gradients adjusted for neurological contrast safety. Sentence structures simplified without condescension. She watched Miles navigate the demo while they calibrated feedback response time. The engineer turned toward her. "You ever think about taking this full-time again?" "I've thought about a lot of things lately. Not just theory work. You have a system-level brain. You don't just debug. You predict failures." Maria tilted her head. "Prediction is just memory put to work." The man scribbled something on a clipboard, nodded toward Miles. "He's sharp." "Sharper than me," she said, smiling. "And stubborn. He has standards." They both laughed quietly. Across the lab, Miles raised his hand. I think your new interface loop is creating a circular redirect when the emotional calibration drops below neutral threshold, he said. The engineer blinked. Maria stepped forward. He's not wrong. Your comfort variable is misfiring. It's classifying hesitation as disengagement. That'll sabotage trauma-informed feedback. The man looked stunned. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. Maria glanced down at Miles. Well done. He shrugged, but his cheeks flushed. The session ended 10 minutes later. Maria gathered their things and rolled her cart out into the hallway again. She was supposed to restock towels on the executive floor next, but something inside her shifted as she glanced at the elevator panel. She pressed the button for the 20th floor. Ethan's office. She didn't plan on knocking. Not yet. But she needed to see it. Needed to feel what it was like to stand outside a room she'd once been locked out of, knowing she could open it now if she chose to. The elevator doors slid open. She stepped inside, one hand resting lightly on Miles's shoulder. Together, they rose. The 20th floor felt different from the rest of the building. Not just in layout, but in air. Everything up here moved slower, more deliberately. The ceilings were higher, the windows wider, the silence deeper. Even the light from the windows looked more expensive, filtered through frosted panels that softened the skyline into a kind of hush. Maria stood in the elevator doorway for a moment, one foot still inside. She wasn't sure what she expected. Guards, maybe? A receptionist to intercept her. But the front desk was empty. Miles rolled forward beside her, wheels whispering across the marble. Is this really it? He asked quietly. She nodded. This is where the decisions get made. There were no signs, no security barriers, just a wide corridor leading toward a corner suite, where the name ROWE was etched into the glass door in clean gold script. No first name, just that one word, like it was a brand, a title, and a legacy all at once. Maria walked slowly. At the end of the corridor, the glass door was slightly ajar. She reached for it, paused, then knocked gently once against the frame. Ethan's voice called from inside. Come in! She pushed the door open. The office was spacious, but not showy. Sleek, soft colors. Minimal furniture. A framed photo of a classroom. Faded, worn, sat on the shelf behind his desk. Maria recognized it immediately. Jefferson Elementary, room 11B. She'd taught workshops there once, back before everything cracked. Ethan stood near the window, a tablet in his hand, suit jacket slung over the back of a nearby chair. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. You made it, he said. I wanted to see it. You're not interrupting, he added quickly. I was reviewing foundation proposals. 2 of them quoted your old work directly. 1 even tried to plagiarize the entire framework. I flagged it. Maria raised an eyebrow. First time someone's admitted that out loud. Ethan gave a crooked smile. You'd be surprised how fast they backpedal when they realize you're still here. She stepped inside and gestured toward the frame photo. You kept that. It's why I started this. I used to stare at it when I got stuck. Reminded me that someone had once believed I could be more than just a test score. Maria lowered herself into a chair across from him, Miles parking just behind her. She didn't speak immediately. She let the room settle. I'm not interested in a ceremonial title, she said at last. I know. I'm not interested in being tokenized either. You don't need a "look how diverse we are" headline. You'd quit the minute it smelled like that, Ethan said, which is exactly why I want you on the board. She nodded once. Then I want 3 things in writing. Ethan straightened. Go on. First, she said. I want hiring power over every community integration consultant. No advisory walls, no rubber-stamped resumes. Real authority, done. Second, I want 10% of the pilot sites to be selected by teacher nomination, not district partnership. Let the educators tell us which schools are desperate, not just the ones with PR-friendly metrics. Agreed? And third, her voice dropped slightly, I want disability access built in from the code level, not as a patch, not as a plug-in. From the start, Ethan didn't blink. We'll scrap and rebuild the foundation modules if we have to. Maria leaned back, watching him. He wasn't bluffing. He was listening. Miles shifted beside her, a quiet smile on his face. Ethan turned toward him. We're building something for you too, you know. For kids like me? Miles asked. No, Ethan said. For kids exactly like you. Maria felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't speak. Ethan walked to his desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. In there's the draft charter, the board seat, the compensation. I tried to make it fair, but I expect you'll have notes. I will. Good. That's why I'm giving it to you now. Maria opened the folder and scanned the first page. Legal jargon, salary breakdown, travel budget, consulting clause. She skipped to the last page. The signature line already had her name typed in bold. Dr. Maria Lane. Not janitor, not guest, not facilities support. Doctor. Her hand hovered over the paper. You said once that a sandwich changed your life, she murmured. Ethan nodded slowly. I never forgot it. She looked up. Then don't forget this, either. What we're building here. It's not charity. It's repair. I know. Maria picked up the pen beside the folder and signed her name. The ink dried quickly, sharp and dark against the white. When she looked at it, she didn't feel like someone returning. She felt like someone beginning again. Miles rolled forward and looked over her shoulder. Is it official now? He asked. She nodded. It's official. Outside the window, the city stretched toward the horizon, layered in light and motion. Inside, Maria Lane, former teacher, former janitor, forever mother, sealed her place at the table. Maria didn't take the elevator down. She walked 20 floors, one at a time, her footsteps echoing through the quiet stairwell like something ceremonial. Miles moved alongside her, the sound of his wheelchair's motor humming low as they descended together. There was no urgency in her pace, no need to rush back to the utility closet or the east corridor. Not today, not after what had been signed. When they reached the 10th floor landing, Maria paused, rested her hand on the rail, and looked through the narrow glass window embedded in the stairwell door. Through it, she could see a hallway she'd cleaned 100 times, where executives used to brush past her without so much as a nod. It looked smaller now, not physically, but in weight, in consequence. Feels weird, Miles said behind her. Maria glanced back. What does? You signing something up there, and now we're here like always. Same stairs, same echo. Just feels like we're in two worlds at once. She gave a quiet nod. We are, but only one of them ever really mattered. They continued downward. When they reached the first floor, the building's pulse returned. Footsteps, voices, movement. Morning had officially begun. Maria pushed open the stairwell door and stepped into the lobby, just as a pair of finance employees entered through the revolving doors, deep in conversation. One of them paused mid-sentence when he saw her. His words caught, lips parting slightly as his eyes flicked to her face, then to Miles. The moment lingered. Then he gave a nod. Dr. Lane. Not loud, not performative, but clear. Maria returned the nod, said nothing, and continued forward. Her cart still waited beside the maintenance desk. She didn't need it today. But she rested her hand on the handle out of habit, tracing the curve of the plastic. It had been her anchor for years, something that gave shape to long days, something that moved when nothing else did. But now it felt like a memory, a necessary one, but no longer present tense. "Are we going home now?" Miles asked. "Not quite yet," Maria said. "There's something I want to do first." She guided them to the east wing, down the long corridor that led to the storage annex. At the very end, past the mop sinks and locked closets, was a small door that led into a forgotten archive room. Most people didn't know it existed. Maria unlocked it with her master key. Inside, the air was still and dry. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Old punch cards, retired uniforms, outdated protocol binders. Ghosts of systems that had changed too slowly. She walked to the far wall, where an old wooden cabinet leaned slightly to one side. From its drawer, she pulled out a stack of dusty personnel files. The ones HR claimed had been digitized and disposed of. But Maria knew better. She'd kept a few, hidden here, knowing some stories needed to be remembered the slow way. She found her file near the bottom. Name: Lane. Maria J. Position. Custodial Services Department Code. 09C Supervisor Notes. Punctual. Quiet. No formal complaints. NA for promotional review. She looked at it for a long time. She closed the file, returned it to the drawer, and shut it gently. Miles watched her with quiet curiosity. "Why keep it?" "Because someday," she said, "someone else will open that drawer, wondering if anyone ever made it out." She turned and walked back to the doorway. Outside, the building buzzed with its usual rhythm. People in pressed suits rushed past without looking. Screens displayed quarterly performance graphs. Phones rang with meetings that would be forgotten by next week. But beneath all of it, Maria felt something settle. Not pride, not vindication. Something older, quieter, place. She belonged again, not because someone gave her permission, but because she'd proven that value doesn't vanish when stripped of a title. It waits. It endures. She stepped into the hallway, reached into her pocket, and handed Miles the key card she'd used for 6 years. "Want to do the honors?" she asked. He looked up at her. "You sure?" Maria nodded. Miles turned to the security kiosk just outside the staff lounge and slid the badge into the terminal. The screen blinked green. Then he slipped the card into the return box mounted on the wall. The building wouldn't need that badge anymore, and neither would she. They headed for the exit, sunlight pouring in through the tall glass facade, casting their shadows long and side by side. One last time, she didn't look back. The IEP meeting took place in a cramped administrative room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old coffee. The walls were pale and tired, covered in laminated posters about neurodiversity and classroom accommodations, most of which hadn't been updated since Maria was still in the classroom herself. She and Miles sat at the end of a rectangular table, while 3 staff members filtered in. Ms. Gardner, the school psychologist, Mr. Flint, the case manager, and an assistant principal named Wallace, who wore a name badge so shiny it caught the flickering light from the ceiling panels. Maria had brought a folder of her own this time. She laid it on the table and kept a gentle hand on Miles's shoulder. "Thanks for coming in," Gardner began, her voice soft but worn. "We've reviewed Miles's progress, and we have some updated notes regarding intervention options." Wallace leaned forward, glancing down at the file. "Before we start, just a reminder. We're here to collaborate. We understand this process can be overwhelming, but we're all on the same side." Maria gave a small nod. "Good. Because I'd like to begin with a clarification on last semester's reading comprehension metrics." Gardner blinked. "Pardon?" Maria opened the folder and pulled out a printed chart. According to the feedback loop generated by your adaptive software, row system, module 3, Miles's retention dropped by 13% during emotionally coded prompts. Your note labels this as avoidant behavior. That's incorrect. Flint leaned forward, frowning. How do you figure? Because the algorithm didn't account for emotional priming bias. Maria said calmly. He was answering based on personal association, not withdrawal. The system interpreted that as disengagement. In reality, he was over-engaging, just not in a way your default flags recognized. Gardner and Wallace exchanged a quick glance. Maria continued. Also, the sentence structures in Module 3 skew too complex for the visual overlay used in his accessibility setting. That delay isn't processing, it's decoding lag. Wallace sat up straighter. Are you saying the software is flawed? I'm saying it wasn't designed with full-spectrum neurological feedback in mind. But it's being corrected? Flint narrowed his eyes. How would you know that? Maria didn't answer right away. She simply reached into her folder again and handed them a newly printed memo, marked with the official seal of the Rowe Foundation. Her name sat at the top. Dr. Maria Lane, board advisor. Their silence stretched across the table like a slow, rippling wave. I helped design the original theory, she said, before it was shelved. Now I'm helping redesign it, with the mistakes addressed. So no, this process isn't overwhelming. It's overdue. Miles looked up at her then, eyes wide but steady. Wallace cleared his throat. Well, that changes things. Not really, Maria said. The problem was always the same. You assumed the issue was the student. It wasn't. Gardner adjusted her glasses. What would you recommend? Maria tapped the folder. Remove Module 3 entirely from his interface profile. Replace it with the upcoming beta from our trauma adaptive pilot. I'll have you added to the release pool. Until then, switch his prompts to auditory only and give him 10 extra seconds per transition. Flint looked down at the memo again. Quiet. Will that affect his benchmark scores? Gardner asked. It'll improve them, Maria said. And more importantly, it'll stop punishing him for how he processes empathy. Wallace gave a small nod. Noted. The rest of the meeting passed quickly. There was little room left to debate. Maria's data was precise. Her authority was evident, and no one at the table had any ground firmer than hers. When they walked out into the hallway, Miles was quiet for a long stretch. Then, you didn't yell. No, you didn't even sound mad. I'm not. He looked up at her. But you were... Sure. Maria paused. I used to go into rooms like that and hope someone would listen. Today, I walked in knowing they would. Miles smiled. It was kinda awesome. She laughed softly, tousling his hair. Let's hope it stays awesome long enough to change more than just your file. As they exited the building, a familiar figure stood waiting by the curb. Ethan, hands in his coat pockets, a quiet look on his face. I didn't expect you here, Maria said. I wanted to see how it went. Maria raised an eyebrow. You checking up on your new advisor? No, he said. I'm learning from her. Miles reached for Maria's hand as they walked toward the car. Ethan opened the passenger door without speaking, helped the boy inside, and then paused as Maria rounded the front. You were right, he said. This isn't charity. It's repair. Maria looked at him for a moment, then nodded. It's also a blueprint. For what? For how we build the next version of everything. She didn't wait for a reply. She got in, buckled her seatbelt, and watched as the school receded in the rearview mirror. They didn't look back, because forward was finally opening. The following week, the foundation launched its first pilot center in a repurposed elementary school on the city's south side. It had once been scheduled for demolition. Broken windows, rusted. Flagpole-faded hopscotch lines still etched in the concrete like ghost games no one remembered how to finish. But today, it breathed again. Maria stood at the top of the front steps, watching volunteers paint a mural across the entrance wall. It wasn't the usual sanitized mission statement or corporate slogan. It was a chalkboard, just a giant blank chalkboard. Underneath it, one line in clean block letters. The first person who saw you matters. The last one does too. She hadn't written it. Ethan had. But it sounded like her. Inside, they were setting up rows of tablets on folding tables, loading beta software onto secure lines, preparing reading nooks and sensory stations. The first batch of students was due next Monday. Miles would be among them, not as a subject, not as a charity case, as a collaborator. Ethan walked in from the East Wing, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand. His face was flushed from moving boxes himself. "They're asking for a press quote from you," he said. Maria didn't look up. "Why not from you?" "They already have mine." "They want the voice behind the changes," she shrugged. "Tell them I said this is just the start. We're not fixing a system, we're replacing it." Ethan smiled. "I'll write it exactly like that." She moved toward the main classroom, her steps slow but sure. At the back of the room, a small podium had been placed near the resource shelves. On it sat a sealed frame with an old cafeteria receipt inside. Faded, crinkled, $1, one lunch tray, no name. Ethan came to stand beside her. "I had to ask a janitor at Jefferson Elementary to help me find it," he said quietly. It was the only physical record left. Maria stared at it. "And you kept it." "It was the first time I learned what value looked like before it had a price tag." They stood in silence for a while. Then Miles entered through the side door. His braces clicked lightly against the polished floor. His backpack slung casually over one shoulder. He looked around the room with quiet focus, then walked straight to the nearest workstation. "Tablet slow," he said. "Frame rates off." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Already?" He gave her a half smile. "Told you I'm faster than your system," she chuckled. "Keep saying that, and you'll be rewriting it in a month." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "We could use someone like him on the dev team." "You will," Maria said. "Just not yet. Let him finish being a kid first." Miles turned and looked at both of them. "You know, I remember when you used to mop the hallway right outside my reading lab." "I remember when they didn't let you in the reading lab," Maria said. He tilted his head. "You ever think, if that dollar hadn't bought him a sandwich, none of this would have happened?" Maria's eyes softened. "I think it did more than buy him lunch. It bought time. And time turns into memory. That's the currency. Nobody counts." The door opened again, this time with a young woman from the community liaison team carrying a clipboard. She gave a small wave. "Dr. Lane? We have a family asking for early enrollment." They walked in after seeing the chalkboard. Maria nodded. "I'll be right there." She turned to Ethan. "You've built something good here." "We built it together." "No," she said. "You built the machine. I just reminded you why it matters." As she stepped toward the hallway, Ethan's voice followed her. "Do you ever miss the classroom?" Maria paused. "Sometimes," she said. "But this feels like a classroom with no walls." And then she was gone. Not vanished, not erased, moved forward. That's what happens when you're underestimated for too long. You stop waiting to be invited. You start building doors into every room that shut you out. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who once passed you by start holding the door open too. If this story moved you, subscribe and don't miss our next story. They called her just a janitor mom. But one kind act forced the mayor himself to kneel before her. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell us in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?